Okay, this video was actually, well, the topic was done, I'm going to say maybe a couple of months ago. Hell, I can't remember. But it was actually taken down from YouTube by the tech overlords, and then it was flagged with misinformation labels. I think the independent guys that check the facts, must have heard a couple of buzzwords they didn't like, and they decided to strike it. It's really comical to me because there was no misinformation in it, but I was talking about and referencing something that's going on in the world right now, and I'm trying to get around the tech guys and the independent fact guys by throwing out a few hints. It involves something that begins with the letter C, and it has the letter O and the letter V in it, and then at the very end it has the numbers 19. If that's any indication of what it's about. I'm trying not to use that word because I don't want another content strike or whatever. In fact, it almost made me want to put videos on other video sharing sites as a result of it. It also involves wearing, when you go into certain indoor settings or something like that, and certain statuses in regards to a certain, I think you get the idea. How this all got started, I'll give you a little background on it, and then I'm going to give a literary analysis, and I'm going to explain why I hate literary analysis most of the time. But there was a news article, and it had something to do with the event that's going on all over the world. I'm just going to call it the event for the rest of this video. When I say the event, I'm talking about COV1, and that's what I'm talking about, so the tech overlords won't take me down here. But there was a news article, I can't remember what it was, because, you got so many news stories about this all the time. I can't even remember the news outlet, but naturally, one thing I'm trying to break myself from doing is whenever there's a news story, I'm trying not to read the comments, because when you read the comments, I don't need to even explain why, that I've came to believe that that's an unhealthy thing for me to do, because it actually affects my mood and it just pisses me off to no end. Even sometimes the people I agree with in the comments piss me off. No need to go into detail about this, but here's where the funny part happens. There was a guy that was commenting about the event, and he was saying that people need to read the philosopher Albert Camus' book, The Plague, and then they'll know what's going on in the world today. They'll know everything that's happening. He predicted it all and all that, which is not correct, I might add. But to make matters worse, an AA cult member commented on it. I was shocked when I saw his name I was like, well, I know that asshole. In fact, I made it a point to block him after that. But he said, well, you have to understand, and I've read the book, which I seriously doubt, and I'll explain why, but I have two plagues that I have to deal with and two major problems. In addition to the event, I deal with alcoholism, which is a far more deadly disease. And, it's hard for me to realize that there's not a lot of people like myself who are deep thinkers that have transcended. Did you just fucking refer to yourself as a deep thinker? God, the arrogance of these freaking people. But I bet he goes to meetings and says he practices humility. But I don't exactly know what he transcended exactly. What did he transcend? I mean, he's worried about two deadly illnesses, one which doesn't exist, alcoholism, and the independent fat guys can shove it if they think that's misinformation, because alcoholism doesn't exist, and the other one. So what did he transcend, and what is it he thinks deeply about? Did he read the big book for the 3 millionth time before we're meeting, and he had a deep thought about it? I don't know, but... So, Albert Camus actually was, I read him a lot when I was a younger guy, and I kind of liked the overall theme of what I'm not going to go into everything he talked about, but I kind of like the ideas of existentialism and absurdism that's present in his works, although Camus didn't like the term existentialist. He rejected that, but since something like that relevant came up, I thought I could incorporate a literary analysis of The Plague, La Peste. And I can tell you how that I feel that anybody who, if they did read that book and they correlated it to living in AA, they got it all wrong. But before I get started, I want to throw in a few disclaimers, because this is personal opinion coming from me. And I also want to say that I generally hate literary analysis. I have a personal interpretation that I get out of every film I've ever watched, but it irritates me sometimes, and I don't know what it is. I really don't know what it is that does this, but it just pisses me off when I'll see like the movie The Shining and somebody will say, well, this is a commentary about capitalism, or when I see something like a scene in a war movie or something, and they're like, well, this is a commentary about Oedipus complex, a mother relationship kind of thing. And I'm thinking, no, it really, I have to go with a quote. I don't know who actually really said it. I don't think it was attributed to the real guy who said it, but sometimes I have to go with a cigar is just a cigar. You know, like in the horror movie Midsommar, I think a pagan cult that kills people in a creepy way is a pagan cult that kills people in a crazy way. I don't think it's anything more than that, even if the self-important directors put a spin on it. I mean, I'm just cynical about that kind of thing. I remember, I forgot the name of the Western. It was a Peck and Paul Western back in the 60s. Chris Christopherson was playing Billy the Kid. And there's a scene at the very, very end, because it's a bloody, violent movie for the most part, you know, and Billy the Kid is shot, and he's not wearing his shirt, and he falls backward out a window, and all these critics were analyzing the scene. They were saying, you know, well, this is the fact that there was no blood in the scene and he didn't have a shirt on indicates the true spirit of the American West. Or I think there was even somebody that said it had something to do with capitalism. It was just, all these people were putting this spin on this. And I remember Chris Christopherson in an interview laughing and saying, well, actually what happened, we were way behind schedule. We were way over budget. Okay, we'd already gone bankrupt on budget. The director was drunk 90% of the time and on drugs, and literally there was like an assistant backup camera guy or something like that that said, look, we got to finish this fucking movie. Just stand there and we'll pretend you're shot and you die, and let's just get out of here. Let's go to post-production here. That's all that was. Kind of like there was a certain scene that I remember was analyzed to death in Raiders of the Lost Ark, because there's a guy, he's doing all of his knife tricks, and Harrison Ford just takes a gun out and shoots him, and there was all kinds of analysis about that, and film critics were saying, you know, it had a commentary about Western culture and its guns against, you know, native populations with their knives and all. Turns out Harrison Ford had dysentery and was too sick to do the scene, and they just cut it short with that. That's all it was. So yeah, cigar is a cigar. Now granted, I love to look at interpretations, and I love to read into things as much as anybody else, but there's a phony sense of self-importance that I see in some literary analysis that it just gets on my nerves. I can't help it. I mean, a certain film, The Neon Demon, I thought it was great. Everybody else hated it because it didn't make sense, and I could have written a long analysis about what it really means, but maybe it's older age, but I don't think it's anything more than what we were watching. Okay, but back on topic, now that I've got that out of the way, I'm going to engage in the very type of thing that I was just demeaning a second ago. I'm going to engage in literary analysis. Albert Camus, the existentialist philosopher who had a central theme of absurdity, and like I said, he didn't like the term existentialist, wrote a book, late 40s, early 50s. It was called La Peste, or The Plague. And a lot of people at the time period said he was making a commentary about the state of mankind during Nazi Germany. I disagree with that totally, and I'll explain why a little later. But the book centers around a very ordinary, he describes it even in the book as ugly, French village or city. It's a fictional location, and he talks about, in the very beginning, as he's putting the setting together, he says, everybody's bored. Everybody's bored because they're devoted to just doing business, more or less. I won't quote it word for word, but you get the idea. He's saying that everybody has habits and everybody is bored to death. Now, to me, this is actually an important part in the opening dialogue of the book, because it's central to the theme that Camus had for a philosophy. In fact, there's somewhere, I don't remember where he said it, but he talked about, you get up in the morning, you ride the train to work, you eat, you go back to work, you come home, you fall into bed, you get up in the morning, and you do the same thing all over again. He was actually primarily concerned with the fact that so oftentimes in our lives, we forget to live because we have fallen into these routines and we don't think beyond the routines. And that every so often a tragedy can come along and it can upset your routine completely, and you realize more or less an existential crisis. You're saying, wow, my routine is all fucked up and my life is upside down. An earthquake just happened and I landed on my fucking ass and I don't know, my whole entire worldview is shattered now. And a central theme of his philosophy, it's written in the myth of Sisyphus, which, if you are familiar with the Greek legends, the guy rolls the rock up the hill all the way to the top of the mountain, and the rock rolls back on top of him, and he goes all the way back down to the bottom of the mountain, which would be a good, accurate summation of, I guess, our working lives and our careers and whatever it is we're doing. We work our asses off to get to a certain peak point, and then it all goes to shit, and we go right back down to the bottom again. But he, in spite of the fact that it sounds like it's a very negative style philosophy he actually had an idea behind this. Let's say the universe is meaningless. Let's say the universe is useless. Let's say there is no inherent value in life. That's stupid to even think there's inherent value in life. It's all crap, really. It's a big cosmic joke. But what if you were happy with the knowledge of this? In other words, like in his book about Sisyphus, what if Sisyphus was happy pushing the rock up the hill and rolling back down again? In other words, that's what he's talking about in one of his other works, where he says that in order to live, we should live free. We should be so free that our very act of existence is rebellion. And what he's saying is the world is absurd, the world is meaningless, the world is useless. But by having full knowledge of this, it could become incredibly liberating to us. We wouldn't be tied down by the idiocy of politics or the idiocies or the constrictions of religion and those types of things. That's kind of why I think that opening line is so important. But ultimately, a plague descends on the town. And it starts out with the plague-infested rats. And, of course, there's a bit of deniability from people about this. The public health officials are like, okay, a few people got sick. We really don't know what's going on. We don't want to start a panic. And by the time, of course, that they realize they're in a plague, the plague is, kind of gotten completely out of control. The central characters in his book, we have the doctor, and I don't remember how to pronounce the name, Rule. I think my French is not so good. We have Rambert, the journalist, and we have a couple of other characters who I could go into a long dialogue about, but I'm going to skim it a little bit for the purposes of this video. But each one of these people react to the plague in a different type of way. There is one character, Taru, who is pretty much angry, despairing, wants nothing to do with human beings, hates everybody, stays in his room all the time, almost commits suicide in the very beginning of the book. But once the plague is in full force and once the entire population of the town is in a panic, he all of a sudden is like exuberant about the whole thing. He wants to be friends with everybody. He wants to buy people drinks. He wants to hang out. He wants to, he's like ecstatic. Because he lives in a constant state of fear before the plague. Now that the plague is shared, now that everybody else is in terror, and now that everybody else is in a panic, he feels a camaraderie with everybody. He feels a sense of brotherhood with everybody. In fact, near the end of the book, it's his downfall that the plague ends. We have the journalist guy that I was talking about earlier that is primarily concerned with one thing. He's got a woman he loves, he's married to, that's outside of the town where the plague is taking place. And because the plague is taking place in this one village, it's quarantined off, it's under lock and key by all the government officials and the police and the cops and everything else. And the only thing he can think about is getting outside the city and getting home to his wife. He's like, look, I don't even belong here. I'm not anybody but a journalist that was here on some stupid assignment. I don't want to write about this fucking plague. I want to get out of here. And most of his character throughout the book is him trying to get out of the town to break the curfew laws. And even though he kind of seeks approval from our hero of the book, the doctor says, I can't tell you what to do, but, I can't necessarily pull strings and do something crooked to get you out of this situation either. Eventually, the journalist comes to the conclusion that he does have a way out of the town. He has a way to get to his wife. He has a way to abandon everybody, and he chooses not to. Because it's more or less the character study of saying, yeah, I can see my wife again, but when I do see her, I want to be able to look her in the eyes. I don't want to go home to my wife and say, hey, I kind of violated all the rules, and I might be spreading plague right now, right here, but I've got to see you again. In other words, he chooses to work as a volunteer to try to help the sick and the suffering because he wants to have self-respect both for himself and for her when he sees her. He wants to be able to look her in the eye and say, I did all I could and I survived the plague. He has an optimistic tinge to what he's doing because he believes that by helping out that eventually the town will overcome the plague. The doctor himself is also kind of central to Camus' philosophy because the doctor even says at one point, I thought when I became a doctor I could get used to death. I thought that I could get to a place where it wouldn't bother me anymore, but I never have been able to do that. When I saw a child die, I said to myself that I will never be able to accept a God or a universe that has order and creation to it if it could allow one kid to die. It doesn't matter all the grand purposes and all the beliefs in predestination and destiny and fate and all of that. It's all useless when you see a little kid die who didn't do anything to deserve that. So he actually comes to the conclusion that there's only one thing he can actually do in the face of all of this madness and all this absurdity. Just keep treating the sick. There's a lot of people that tell him, some of these sick people, they put themselves in danger. You shouldn't even worry about them. You should let that population die off and all that other. And he just says, there's only one thing I can do to stop the plague. The only thing I can do is continue to be a decent human being. And how do I call myself a decent human being? I do it by just doing my job. That's all I know how to do here. So the way he copes with the plague itself is just by trying to ease the suffering of all those suffering with the plague. Although he is putting himself in danger by doing this, he is putting himself in a place of risk. There's also one of the other characters. There's two other characters I want to cover before I get to the end here. But there is the character, and I can't remember his name now, who confesses to the doctor at one point. He's one of the heroic characters to me, who says, I've already experienced a plague in my lifetime. And he goes into the story, and this to me is really important, if you're understanding Camus, is he goes into the story about, my father was a good guy. I liked him a lot. I admired him. He was a gentleman. He was a kind man. He was a wise man and all this other kind of stuff. But he says he was a prosecutor, and he determined whether somebody got the death penalty or not. And he says, one day I went to a trial that he was presiding over, and I watched him argue for this guy to be executed by the state. And he said, well, I was sitting there watching my father, his face all contorted with anger and hatred and rage, demanding the jury sentence this guy to death. The only thing I could do was feel sympathy for the guy that was going to be put to death. And he says, I couldn't reconcile my father with the guy that was being put to death. So he ran away from home, and he became advocate, passionate supporter of abolishing the death penalty. But he said he came to the conclusion that for every political purpose or for every political agenda that you put yourself behind, other people are going to be harmed no matter what. In other words, he said, by trying to stop the death penalty, I've inadvertently caused harm. I've inadvertently caused pain. I've inadvertently caused other people to die as a result of my so-called morals and my so-called good intentions. I've created more harm. The only way I can live in this world whatsoever is to try to minimize harm to the best of my knowledge without getting involved in the grandest schemes of things and trying to make other people bend or bow to whatever I see as a vision for the future. Now, this is all paraphrase. I'm not going into it, completely. But there is the issue of the bishop, and a lot of people only gloss over the second sermon from the bishop. The bishop in the very beginning says, we got the plague we deserved. We're an immoral group of people. We're sinners, and we're nasty, and we're all the inherent bad things about us, and we just deserve this. And there's a big dialogue between him and the doctor that I'm going to kind of skim, because I think any video on YouTube puts that one as the most important. The ironic thing of the situation is the bishop later on tells the doctor, the main character, he says that no, there is no reason to justify an innocent kid dying. There is no reason to say that there's anything good or moral about, somebody innocent dying. And the bishop himself eventually dies. but he dies in an absurd manner, which is central to Camus, absurdity, because he doesn't necessarily have the plague. He has all these symptoms, but he doesn't have the other symptoms. So when he dies, the death certificate, it just says, it kind of says maybe he died of the plague. They don't even know. The most crucial part of this, because the book itself mainly focuses on the different characters and how they behave to the plague, and you have a lot of minor players in the book as well, and it would take me like 2-3 hours if I was going to analyze the entire book in its entirety. But at the very end of the book, and I think this is where the people who are talking about the event out there and the AA people are getting this all wrong about Camus' philosophy, his central philosophy, and I think my voice is giving out from all this talking, but in the very end, the plague ends. And when the plague ends, the townspeople are naturally what I think any of us would do right now if the event that's happening outside right now was suddenly vanished overnight. The townspeople are all out in the street. They're all celebrating. They're having a great time with one another. All political differences are put aside. There's nobody judging anybody for being immoral. There's nobody looking down on anybody for the way that they behave or the way they look or whatever it is. There's nobody judging anybody based on their stations in life or whatever, and everybody's just happily celebrating in the streets. It's actually a great moment. It's actually a moment of victory. Now, the main character of the doctor is a little sad watching this, and to me, so many people get this wrong, and this is my interpretation after reading so much Camus. The doctor says the people are celebrating now, but the plague is always here. The plague has always been here, and the plague will be back. And certain people, like the people that were arguing in the news media comment thing, were saying, well, see, what he's saying is we need to be in precaution mode forever. We need to do this. We need to do that. That's not what he's really talking about, nor is he talking about battling a disease of alcoholism. Albert Camus is saying the plague is our everyday lives. The plague is our everyday existence. We're always dying every single moment of every single hour of every day, okay? I could die right here making this video. I could be talking and then all of a sudden collapse, and that's the end of me, okay? You could wake up in the morning thinking you're going to have a normal work day, and you could go to work, and you could not come home that night. In fact, the journalist character, Rambert, even says at one point, he says, it's funny how people are being kind to one another because there's a deadly disease going on, but he's like, any one of us could have got run over by a car and got killed, just last week before we even knew there was a plague. Camus' philosophy in summation is this: the way that people are behaving at the end, the celebration, the non-judgment, the kindness towards one another, the acceptance of one another, and all of that, he's saying that we should be living life like that all the time, because we're always dying, and every moment could be our last moment. It kills me how many people see this particular work of literature as a commentary about the state of life, and in my opinion, that's rather sad, because you're missing out on the overall point. If you say, well, the plague is Nazi Germany, okay, then you kind of missed the point of Camus' philosophy altogether, because Nazi Germany had a beginning and it had an end, and it ended. So if you're seeing it as this is a terrible event in history and now it's all over with, you've completely missed out on the fact that we're always living one breath away from a tragedy. But the best thing that we could do in defense of that tragedy is not be like the AA people, which is hopelessly miserable and hopelessly dependent and hopelessly confused about our own motivations and actions. But what you would do in a Camus worldview is you would cling to the little things in life, okay? You would look at, like one of the characters in The Plague, who enjoys a swim by the sea and enjoys the stars, or enjoys the, Camus wrote one time about the beautiful naked bodies on beaches or something like that, in contrast to the heavily religious indoctrination of the controlling church at the time. That was in another philosophy book. That wasn't in The Plague. But overall, I just had to put my own literary spin on this, because I think it's also central to my own ideas about life in general. If you realized how many things are, how many things are fragile, how many things hang in the balance or whatever, if you're like me, you just got OCD and you just have anxiety all the time, you can kind of look at this as an almost liberating viewpoint. I remember, someone saying, a nihilist would say, well, this is all meaningless, and someone like Albert Camus would have said, so? It's even comical to me that Albert Camus himself died in the very ironic conditions that he wrote about all the time. He had a train ticket. He was going to get on a train, and a good friend of his convinced him to not get on the train but get in the car but take a ride with him, and they both got killed in a wreck. That was central to why Albert Camus was always talking about absurdity. Because, yeah, you can win a lottery one day, and then you can go to the doctor the next day and be told you got 2 months to live. Or you can, you can get a promotion at work only for the company to shut down. And in the face of all of this, Albert Camus is saying, live free anyway. Don't let it constrain you. Don't let it destroy you. Don't let it be the thing that change you to the place where all your meaning in life rests upon that. He even says, when you come to the realizations that I've come to in one of his books, he says you're either going to kill yourself or you're going to become free. Now, he's not saying go kill yourself. He's just saying you would realize the world is useless. The world is absurd. The world is stupid. So what? Be happy anyway. And I think I've talked, according to the clock, I've talked 30 minutes. It would be a tragedy almost if the tech overlords destroyed this video, but you know what? That would fit right in with Camus' absurdity. Until next time.